The sweet scent of funnel cake and caramelized sugar hung thick in the autumn air, mixing with the cheerful chaos of children's laughter and carnival music that blared from tinny speakers scattered throughout the street festival. Eleanor kept her hand raised, counting heads for the third time in as many minutes. Her kindergarten class of 18 students clustered around her in their neon yellow field trip vests, bouncing with excitement as they pointed at the face painting booth and the balloon artist twisting rubber into improbable shapes. She smiled at their enthusiasm, feeling the familiar warmth that came with these moments, the simple joy of watching children experience wonder. The October sun filtered through the amber leaves of the old oak trees lining the blocked-off street, and everything felt safe and ordinary until the first crack split the air. Eleanor's mind struggled to categorize the sound, her body freezing for a fraction of a second before instinct took over and she was already moving, already shouting for her students to get down. The second crack came with screaming, the crowd surging in every direction like a shattered mirror, and Eleanor saw a small boy standing alone near the ring toss booth, his dark hair and wide, terrified eyes locked on something behind her. She didn't think. Her body simply moved, covering the distance in 4 stumbling steps as more gunfire erupted, and she threw herself over the child, her arms wrapping around his small frame as she felt the impact of the ground against her knees and shoulder. The world became pressure and sound, and the hammering of her own heart against her ribs, the little boy's body trembling beneath hers as she pressed him down, making herself a shield, making herself bigger, making herself the barrier between him and whatever horror was unfolding behind her. Time stretched and contracted strangely. She could feel every breath the child took, every shudder, and she whispered things she hoped were soothing, even though her voice shook with terror. Then silence fell, broken only by sobbing and the sound of running feet, and Eleanor slowly lifted her head. The boy beneath her was crying soundlessly, his face pressed against her shoulder, and as she carefully sat up, still keeping him close, she noticed his wrist. A bracelet circled the delicate bones, heavy and ornate, far too expensive for a child's jewelry, with strange markings etched into dark metal that caught the light. He wouldn't release her. His small hands fisted in her cardigan, and Eleanor found herself rocking him, murmuring reassurances while scanning desperately for his parents. Police sirens wailed closer. Officers began flooding the scene, and Eleanor tried to stand, tried to find someone to take this traumatized child, but he clung tighter. She was explaining to a female officer that she didn't know the boy when the growl of engines made everyone turn. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up to the police barricade, and Eleanor felt cold flood her stomach. A man emerged from the lead vehicle, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with lethal confidence that parted the crowd like water. His suit was immaculate, his expression carved from ice, and his eyes swept the scene before locking onto the child in Eleanor's arms. He approached with frightening speed, and Eleanor instinctively tightened her hold on the boy. The man stopped 3 feet away, his gaze dropping to the bracelet, then rising to Eleanor's face. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. "Stay exactly where you are. The boy's father is coming. You don't move until he gets here. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a question, and Eleanor's fear spiked into something approaching panic because she suddenly understood with perfect clarity that this child, this terrified little boy with the expensive bracelet, belonged to someone dangerous. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The 4th SUV arrived without fanfare, blending seamlessly with the others, except for the way every man present shifted their attention toward it like iron filings responding to a magnet, and Eleanor felt the change in the air before she even saw him emerge. Alexander Thornhill stepped from the vehicle with the kind of fluid grace that belonged to apex predators. His charcoal suit fitted perfectly to broad shoulders and a lean frame that radiated controlled violence even in stillness. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that felt dangerous, all sharp angles and dark eyes that swept the scene with clinical precision before landing on the child still clinging to Eleanor's cardigan. His face remained expressionless. But something flickered in those cold eyes when they registered the small boy, and then his gaze lifted to Eleanor and she forgot how to breathe. He moved through the crowd, and police officers parted without question, their body language unconsciously deferential, and Eleanor understood with sudden clarity that this man commanded fear the way other people commanded respect. He stopped 5 feet away, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark irises, and his attention dropped to the bracelet on the boy's wrist. The change in his expression was microscopic but unmistakable, tension bleeding from his shoulders as he slowly lowered himself to one knee, bringing his considerable height down to something less intimidating. "Henry," his voice was low and rough with barely contained emotion, "come here." The little boy's grip on Eleanor loosened slightly, his tear-stained face turning toward the man, and Eleanor watched recognition and relief flood the child's features. "Daddy." The word was a sob, and suddenly the boy released her completely, stumbling into Alexander's arms with desperate force. Alexander caught him easily, one hand cradling the back of Henry's head, while the other pressed him close. And for 3 heartbeats, Eleanor saw past the dangerous exterior to the father terrified for his son. Then Alexander's eyes opened and fixed on her again, and the vulnerability vanished beneath ice. His attention traveled over her methodically, cataloging details with unsettling intensity, before he rose to his full height of well over 6 feet, Henry secured against his chest. "What is your name?" It should have been a question but emerged as a command, the kind of voice accustomed to immediate obedience, and Eleanor's instinct screamed at her to lie, to give a false name and disappear into the chaos. But something about his gaze made deception feel impossible. "Eleanor Ashworth." Her voice shook despite her attempt at steadiness. Alexander studied her for a long moment before James approached and leaned in, whispering something urgent while gesturing at the police cordoning off the scene and the news vans arriving at the periphery. Alexander's jaw tightened fractionally, and when his eyes returned to Eleanor, they held a new calculation that made her stomach drop. "You are coming with us." Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. "What?" "No, I have students. I need to. You need to get in the vehicle." Alexander's tone allowed for no argument, already turning toward the SUV while Henry clung to him. Eleanor's shock transformed into indignation and fear. "You cannot just take me, I don't even know you." "This man," Alexander gestured slightly toward James without looking back, "will explain why you want to accept my protection. Right now, Miss Ashworth, I do not repeat myself." The quiet authority in those words was more compelling than any shout, and when James's hand appeared at her elbow, gentle but insistent, Eleanor found herself walking toward the vehicle, even as her mind screamed that this was insane, that she should run, that nothing about this was remotely safe. But Henry's small face appeared over Alexander's shoulder, eyes finding hers with desperate trust, and Eleanor stopped resisting. The interior of the SUV smelled of leather, and something darker that Eleanor could not quite identify, maybe gun oil or expensive cologne. And Henry's small hand gripped hers with desperate strength as the vehicle glided through traffic with unsettling smoothness. The world outside the tinted windows reduced to shadows and light. Alexander sat across from them, his posture deceptively relaxed, one hand resting on Henry's shoulder, while his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She tried asking where they were going, her voice emerging shakier than she intended, and Alexander's response was clipped. "Somewhere safe." That told her precisely nothing, and her frustration began overriding her fear. She had students who would be terrified, a roommate who expected her home, a life that did not include being abducted by dangerous men in expensive suits, but every time she opened her mouth to protest further, Henry's grip tightened and she found herself swallowing the words. The city gave way to suburbs and then to estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates, each property more expansive than the last, until the SUV turned onto a private road that wound through manicured grounds for what felt like miles. The mansion that finally appeared made Eleanor's breath catch, despite her anger and fear. It rose from the landscape like something from another era, all stone and glass and architectural ambition, beautiful and forbidding in equal measure. The vehicle stopped beneath a portico, where two more men in dark suits waited, their eyes scanning the surroundings with military precision before James opened the door. Alexander emerged first, lifting Henry with easy strength, and Eleanor followed on unsteady legs, her teacher flats seeming absurdly inadequate against the marble steps. Inside, the opulence was overwhelming but cold, more showpiece than home, and Alexander led them through hallways lined with art that Eleanor suspected cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. He stopped finally in what appeared to be a sitting room, all cream upholstery and dark wood, gesturing for Eleanor to sit, while Henry remained attached to his side. Alexander's voice when he spoke held no warmth, but also no cruelty, just flat statement of fact. The shooting today was an assassination attempt. The target was Henry. There is a rival organization, the Sinclairs, attempting to expand into territory my family has controlled for 3 generations. Killing my son would be both revenge and strategy. Eleanor felt ice flood her veins. You are telling me someone tried to murder a 5-year-old child? Alexander's jaw tightened fractionally. Yes. And you threw yourself over him, which means the shooters saw your face. Which means Richard Sinclair now knows there is a witness who can identify his men, which means you are in danger. Eleanor's mind reeled, trying to process the casual way he discussed murder and territory and danger as though they were business metrics. This is insane. I need to call the police. I need to. The police cannot protect you from Richard Sinclair, Alexander interrupted, and something in his tone made it clear this was not arrogance, but experience. I can. For now, you stay here. You stay alive. Those are your options. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to demand her freedom, but looking at Henry's exhausted face pressed against his father's chest, she felt her resistance waver. I need to call my roommate. Catherine will be terrified. Alexander considered this, then nodded once. You may call. I will be listening. You will tell her you are safe but cannot explain where you are. You will not mention me or Henry or anything you have seen. Do you understand? It was not really a question. And when James produced a phone, Eleanor took it with trembling fingers, hating how small her voice sounded when Catherine answered, hating the lies that spilled from her lips about an unexpected opportunity and being out of touch for a few days, hating the fear bleeding through her roommate's concern. When the call ended, Eleanor felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. Alexander must have seen it because his expression shifted slightly, something almost like sympathy crossing his features before vanishing. James will show you to a room. We will discuss the details tomorrow. Eleanor followed James through more hallways, barely registering the luxury surrounding her until he opened a door to reveal a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites, with a massive bed and French doors that she suspected led to a balcony. James departed with a quiet instruction to rest, and Eleanor heard the snick of the lock engaging. She crossed to the door and tried the handle. Locked. Her hands started trembling as the full reality settled over her like suffocating weight. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, her life upended by a single moment of instinct, and she had no idea when or if she would ever be free again. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains in patterns Eleanor had watched shift across the ceiling for hours, sleep having remained elusive in this beautiful prison. But when she finally rose and tested the door handle, it turned smoothly and she found herself standing in the hallway with her heart pounding at this small, unexpected freedom. She moved cautiously through corridors that seemed less intimidating in daylight, following instinct until she discovered her room opened onto a private courtyard garden where fountain water splashed over stone and roses climbed trellises in defiant bloom despite the approaching autumn. The air smelled of jasmine and earth, so different from the leather and gun oil that had filled the vehicle yesterday. And Eleanor sank onto a bench, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly. The sound of small footsteps made her turn, and Henry appeared in the archway wearing pajamas printed with dinosaurs, his dark hair mussed from sleep and his eyes finding her with visible relief. "You are still here." His voice was small and uncertain, and Eleanor felt her teacher instincts override everything else. "Of course I am still here. Come sit with me." Henry approached slowly before climbing onto the bench beside her, his small body pressed against her side seeking comfort, and Eleanor found herself telling him about the flowers, asking him questions about his favorite colors and animals, watching him gradually relax into the familiar rhythm of an adult who actually listened to his answers. She did not see Alexander watching from a window 2 stories above, his coffee forgotten in his hand as something he had not felt in years, shifted behind his ribs at the sight of his son animated and trusting with this woman who had thrown herself over him without hesitation. James appeared at Alexander's shoulder with tension written across his features. "The Sinclairs are searching. They have people asking questions at hospitals, reviewing security footage from the festival, running facial recognition. They will identify her within 24 hours, if they have not already." Alexander's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained on the courtyard where Eleanor was now helping Henry collect smooth pebbles from around the fountain. "I know." James waited, then spoke carefully. "Are you certain about this? Bringing her here? Keeping her close?" Alexander finally turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "She saved my son. That creates obligation and debt." He moved toward the door, descending stairs with James following, emerging into the courtyard where Henry immediately ran to him with a handful of stones, chattering about the game Miss Eleanor had invented. Alexander listened with rare patience before his attention lifted to Eleanor, who stood slowly with wariness returning to her eyes. "Henry, darling, go ask Maria for breakfast. The staff will be awake now." Henry hesitated, clearly wanting to stay, but Alexander's tone allowed no argument, and the boy departed reluctantly. Eleanor crossed her arms over her cardigan, the morning suddenly feeling colder despite the sunshine. "How long?" Alexander understood the question. "Until Richard Sinclair is no longer a threat." Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "And when will that be? Days, weeks, months? I have a job, students who need me, a life." "You had a life," Alexander corrected quietly. "Now you have a target on your back. Now you have men who will kill you to hurt me and to silence a witness. Now you have a choice to make about whether you value your independence more than your survival." The brutal honesty should have terrified her, but instead, Eleanor felt anger surge hot and clarifying. "What exactly are you, Mr. Thornhill? Say it clearly so I understand what I'm caught up in." Alexander stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, and his voice was steady and cold. "I am a criminal, Miss Ashworth. I control territory and business that exist outside the law. I hurt people who threaten what is mine. You should absolutely not trust me. But I am also the only thing standing between you and Richard Sinclair, who makes me look merciful by comparison. You can accept my protection and stay alive, or you can leave and take your chances alone. Your choice. Choose now." Eleanor met his eyes and felt the morning air press against her skin like a living thing, every sense heightened by the choice she knew would change everything, and her voice when it emerged was steadier than she expected. "I will stay, but not as a prisoner, not locked in that beautiful room waiting for you to decide my fate. If I am going to be here, if Henry has already attached himself to me, then let me do what I am trained to do. Let me care for him, teach him, give him some normalcy in all this chaos." Alexander's expression shifted through surprise to calculation, his eyes searching hers for deception or weakness, and apparently finding neither. You want to be his teacher, his nanny. Here. Eleanor lifted her chin. He needs stability and routine, and someone who is not afraid to talk to him like he is a person, instead of a fragile piece of porcelain. You said yourself this could take weeks. He cannot just exist in limbo waiting for danger to pass. Children need structure. Alexander was silent for a long moment, and Eleanor could see the dangerous intelligence behind his eyes weighing risks and benefits, trying to find the angle she was working, but there was no angle, and somehow that seemed to be what finally convinced him. You are either very brave or very foolish. Fine. You will stay with Henry. You will provide lessons and supervision, but you will not leave the grounds. You will not contact anyone without my approval, and you will follow security protocols exactly as James instructs. Do we have an agreement, Miss Ashworth? Eleanor extended her hand with only slight trembling. We have an agreement, Mr. Thornhill. His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused, and sending electricity up her arm that she tried desperately to ignore. And she thought she saw his pupils dilate slightly before he released her and stepped back, distance reimposing itself. James will arrange appropriate supplies, educational materials, whatever you need. He turned toward the house but paused, glancing back with something almost vulnerable crossing his features before vanishing. Thank you. For Henry. Then he was gone, and Eleanor sank back onto the bench with her heart hammering, wondering what exactly she had just agreed to and why the thought of staying in this dangerous, beautiful place did not terrify her as much as it should. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt surreal in its domesticity against the backdrop of armed guards and security protocols. Eleanor transformed one of the estate's smaller sitting rooms into a classroom, filling it with books and art supplies and educational games that appeared with startling efficiency whenever she mentioned them to James. Henry bloomed under the attention and structure, his initial traumatized silence giving way to curiosity and laughter and the endless questions of a bright 5-year-old mind. Eleanor taught him letters and numbers, read him stories, took him on carefully supervised walks through the gardens where he collected leaves and rocks and built elaborate imaginary worlds. And Alexander, who Eleanor had assumed would remain distant and uninvolved, began appearing in the doorway of their makeshift classroom at odd hours, watching with an expression she could not quite decipher as she guided Henry through lessons or played elaborate pretend games that made his son giggle. Sometimes Alexander would stay for just moments before disappearing back into whatever dark business occupied his days. Other times he would lower himself into one of the chairs, silent but present, and Eleanor would feel her awareness of him like a physical touch even while she focused on Henry. One evening, nearly a week after her decision to stay, Eleanor was reading Henry a story about a brave knight and a dragon, the boy tucked against her side on the sofa in her sitting room, when she realized Alexander stood in the doorway, and she had no idea how long he had been there. Henry spotted his father and immediately demanded he join them, patting the cushion on his other side, and after brief hesitation, Alexander moved into the room with that predatory grace and settled beside his son. Eleanor continued reading, but her voice felt unsteady, hyper-aware of Alexander's presence just beyond Henry's small body, the three of them arranged like a family portrait that had no right to exist. Henry's breathing gradually deepened and slowed, sleep claiming him mid-sentence, and Eleanor gently closed the book, her eyes lifting to find Alexander already watching her over their sleeping child. And the intimacy of the moment struck her breathless. Something in the air between them felt alive and dangerous, the silence broken only by Henry's soft breathing and the distant ticking of a clock somewhere in the house, and Eleanor realized her own pulse was visible at her throat, where Alexander's gaze had dropped before lifting back to her eyes with an intensity that made her fingers tighten on the book's cover. The moment stretched fragile and electric until James's voice cut through from the doorway, quiet, but urgent enough that Alexander's expression transformed instantly from whatever unguarded emotion had been there to cold focus. "We have a problem." Alexander stood in one fluid motion, careful not to disturb Henry, and Eleanor watched him cross to James with her heart suddenly racing for entirely different reasons as the two men conferred in voices too low to hear, but with body language that screamed crisis. When Alexander turned back, his face was granite. "Stay here with Henry. Do not leave this room." He was gone before Eleanor could ask questions, James following, and she sat frozen with the sleeping child against her side and fear crawling up her spine like frost. Minutes passed like hours before the door opened again, and Alexander reappeared with an expression that made Eleanor's stomach drop. "Catherine is missing." The words landed like physical blows, and Eleanor was on her feet instantly, Henry stirring, but not waking as she laid him gently on the sofa. "What do you mean, missing?" "The Sinclairs went to your apartment 3 hours ago." "My people had surveillance in place, but your roommate left for work this morning before we could extract her. She never arrived at her destination." Eleanor felt the room tilt sideways, her hands going cold. "You have to find her. You have to bring her back. She has nothing to do with this. She does not even know what is happening. She is innocent." Alexander's jaw was tight. "I have every available resource searching for her now." Eleanor crossed the space between them without thinking, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Then let me help. Let me do something. I know her routines, her habits, places she might go. I cannot just stand here while she is in danger because of me." Alexander caught her wrists, not roughly, but firmly. "You will stay exactly where you are. If the Sinclairs took her, they did it to draw you out. Walking into their hands accomplishes nothing except giving them 2 hostages instead of 1. His logic was sound, but Eleanor wanted to scream against it, wanted to rage at the unfairness that her choice to stay here had painted a target on Catherine's back. "Please." Her voice cracked. "She is the closest thing I have to family." Alexander's expression shifted through something that might have been understanding or might have been pain. "I will bring her back. You have my word. But you stay here, you stay with Henry, and you stay alive. Do you understand me?" Eleanor nodded because she had no other choice, and Alexander released her wrists, his thumb brushing across her pulse point in a gesture so brief she might have imagined it before he was gone again, and she was left in the suffocating quiet with a sleeping child and her own spiraling terror. She paced the room for what felt like eternities, checking on Henry every few minutes, her mind conjuring increasingly horrific scenarios about what might be happening to Catherine. The sun tracked across the sky with cruel indifference and shadows lengthened, and still there was no word. James appeared once to bring food she could not eat, and to assure her that Alexander had personally taken command of the search, which somehow made everything feel both more real and more surreal. Night fell. Henry woke and sensed her distress, becoming clingy and anxious in a way that forced Eleanor to compartmentalize her fear and focus on keeping him calm, reading him stories and playing quiet games while her ears strained for any sound from beyond the door. It was nearly midnight when she finally heard footsteps in the corridor, and her heart stopped as the door opened to reveal Alexander with Catherine behind him, her friend pale and shaking but visibly unharmed, and Eleanor's knees nearly buckled with relief. Eleanor collapsed onto the sofa beside Catherine and pulled her friend into a fierce embrace, feeling her shake with residual fear and adrenaline, while over Catherine's shoulder she met Alexander's eyes and saw something raw there before he turned away, issuing quiet commands to James about security protocols and safe rooms. Catherine pulled back first, her hands gripping Eleanor's arms as she searched her face with wild eyes that held questions and confusion and the beginning edge of understanding about exactly what kind of world her roommate had stumbled into. Later, after Catherine had been settled in a guest suite with guards posted and medical attention provided, despite her insistence she was fine, after Henry had been checked on and kissed goodnight one more time, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep and moving through the darkened halls with her heart still racing from the terror of those endless hours not knowing. She found Alexander in his study, as if drawn by invisible threads, the room illuminated only by firelight that cast shadows across his face as he sat in a leather chair with a crystal tumbler of amber liquid dangling from his fingers, and exhaustion etched into every line of his body. He looked up when she entered, but did not speak. Simply watched her cross the space and lower herself into the chair across from his desk, with the fire crackling between them and the weight of everything that had happened pressing down like a physical thing. "Thank you." Her voice came out quieter than intended. "For bringing her back. For keeping your word." Alexander took a slow drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "You understand the cost. They know about her now. She is a target same as you. Keeping her safe means keeping her here, or moving her somewhere they cannot reach, and either option steals her normal life away." Eleanor nodded because she had already thought through these implications during those agonizing hours of waiting, had already accepted the guilt of dragging Catherine into danger simply by existing in her orbit. She will hate it, being confined, being guarded. She values her freedom above almost everything. Like someone else I know. Alexander's mouth quirked in something not quite a smile. "You could have walked away from all this. Multiple times I gave you the option. Yet you stay. Why?" The question hung between them, heavy with meanings Eleanor was not entirely ready to examine, but the darkness and firelight and residual fear made her reckless with truth. "Because Henry needs stability and I can provide that. Because running felt like choosing to be a victim instead of a participant in my own fate. Because Catherine is safer with your resources protecting her than she would be alone with Sinclair's people hunting." She paused, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "Because maybe I am tired of playing it safe and building a small, careful life that never risks anything important." Alexander leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his eyes catching firelight in a way that made them seem to glow. "Do you want to know what I am tired of, Eleanor?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I am tired of being alone. Of trusting no one. Of watching my son grow up in a fortress because the world I built to protect him is the same world that threatens him." His voice dropped lower, rough with something that might have been pain. "My father taught me that power requires isolation. That caring about people makes you weak because they become leverage against you. I watched him destroy anyone he loved before they could be used to destroy him. When Henry's mother died, I thought it was proof he was right. That I had no business trying to build something soft and good, because everything I touch turns to ash." Eleanor's throat tightened at the raw honesty bleeding through his words, at the glimpse of the man beneath the armor of violence and control. "You did not kill her. Childbirth is not your fault." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "I got her pregnant knowing the risks, knowing the life I would bring a child into, knowing I am my father's son no matter how much I want to believe otherwise. She died afraid, Eleanor, afraid of what would happen to Henry, afraid I would turn him into what I am." Eleanor stood abruptly from the chair, her heart twisting painfully at the weight of guilt and fear in Alexander's voice, and she crossed to him without thinking, her hand reaching for his shoulder in a gesture meant to comfort even as her mind screamed warnings about the danger of touching him, of crossing lines that once breached could never be undrawn. "You are not your father. Henry adores you, he feels safe with you, and you are trying every day to give him something better than what you had. That is not nothing, Alexander." He looked up at her with eyes that held decades of accumulated pain and doubt, and something in her chest cracked open at the vulnerability there. This powerful, dangerous man reduced to his most human fears in the firelit darkness. The next morning brought deceptive normalcy, Eleanor waking to find Henry already dressed and bouncing with energy, dragging her toward the breakfast room where Alexander sat reading reports with coffee steaming beside him and the morning light turning his dark hair bronze at the edges. The domesticity of it felt surreal and precious and terrifying all at once. Henry chattered through breakfast about a bird he had seen in the garden and a game he wanted to play, and Eleanor responded with appropriate enthusiasm while hyper-aware of Alexander's presence across the table, the memory of last night's conversation hanging between them like smoke. After breakfast, she took Henry to the library for lessons, working through basic mathematics and reading comprehension while he fidgeted and asked questions about everything except the material in front of him. "You like my daddy?" The statement came without preamble or context, delivered with the blunt honesty only small children possess, and Eleanor felt her face heat instantly. "Your daddy is very kind to let me stay here where I am safe. That is not what I mean." Henry's green eyes, so like Alexander's, regarded her with unnerving perception. "You look at him the way Mateo's mama looks at his papa. Do you love him?" Eleanor's throat closed around any response that might have been truthful or diplomatic, her mind scrambling for words that would not lie to this child, but also would not confirm feelings she barely admitted to herself. "I care about your daddy very much, and I care about you very much. Sometimes grown-up feelings are complicated." Henry considered this with the gravity of a philosopher, then asked with devastating innocence, "Are you going to be my new mommy?" The question landed like a detonation, Eleanor's heart stopping completely as every possible response died unspoken because there was no safe answer, no way to navigate between hope and heartbreak. Before she could formulate anything coherent, Henry continued in a small voice, "I would like that. If you stayed forever. I do not remember my real mommy very much anymore, and that makes me sad, but you make me not sad." Eleanor pulled him into a hug because words were impossible. Her eyes burning with tears, she refused to shed, and she did not hear Alexander enter until his sharp intake of breath made her look up to find him frozen in the doorway, with an expression that cycled through shock and pain and something that might have been longing before settling into careful neutrality. "Henry, go find James and ask him about the new security puppies. We talked about this, remember? You wanted to help name them." Henry brightened immediately and scrambled away, leaving Eleanor and Alexander alone in the sudden suffocating quiet. She stood slowly, bracing herself for anger or rejection. But Alexander simply looked at her with exhaustion and hunger and fear, all warring across his features, before he finally spoke in a voice gone rough. "We need to talk about what he just asked you." Eleanor met his gaze and felt the weight of Henry's questions settle between them like something solid and unavoidable, her mind racing through all the implications of what the child had asked and what Alexander might think she had encouraged or manipulated, even though she had done nothing except be kind to a boy who needed kindness. "I did not put that idea in his head, Alexander. I have never suggested anything like that to him. I would never use your son to get closer to you." Alexander crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, tension radiating through his shoulders as he spoke in a voice gone tight with control. "I know you would not. That is not what concerns me. What concerns me is that my son is attaching to someone who may not stay, who has every reason to walk away from this insanity the moment it is safe to do so, and when you leave it will devastate him." The accusation beneath the words stung even as Eleanor understood the fear driving them, the terror of a father watching his child risk heartbreak. "And what would you have me do, Alexander? Push him away? Be cold to him? Treat him like a job instead of a little boy who needs affection and stability? Is that what you want?" He turned to face her and his expression was raw with conflict. "I want him safe. Safe from Sinclair. Safe from this life. Safe from caring about people who can be taken from him." His voice dropped. "The way his mother was taken. The way everyone I have ever cared about has been taken or driven away or destroyed by proximity to what I am." Eleanor felt her heart crack at the pain bleeding through his words. at the decades of loss and guilt that had taught him to equate love with inevitable destruction. Henry will experience loss in his life, no matter how much you try to prevent it. That is part of being human. But isolating him, teaching him not to trust or attach or love, that will damage him far worse than the risk of losing someone he cares about. She moved closer, her voice softening. Your son is brave and resilient and capable of so much more than you give him credit for. He is not fragile, Alexander. He is strong because you made him strong. Alexander's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would argue, but instead he asked the question that hung beneath everything else. And what about you, Eleanor? Are you strong enough for what staying here means? Because I cannot offer you normal. I cannot promise safety or simplicity or any of the things you deserve. My enemies will always see you as leverage against me. My world will always be violent and dangerous and morally compromised. I can protect you, but I cannot change what I am. She held his gaze and spoke the truth that had been growing in her chest for weeks now, despite every logical reason to deny it. I am not asking you to change what you are. I see you, Alexander, the parts you show the world and the parts you hide. And yes, I am afraid sometimes of the violence and the danger, but I am more afraid of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to stay. Before he could respond, James appeared in the doorway with an expression that sent ice through Eleanor's veins because she recognized that look now, the one that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. We have a problem. The security sweep found 3 devices, cameras and audio. Someone has been feeding Sinclair real-time intelligence for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Alexander's transformation was instant, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the mask of the crime lord as he moved toward James with lethal focus. Where? Primary locations. Your office, the main hallway outside Henry's suite, and the library. James's eyes flicked to Eleanor. They have seen and heard everything. Alexander went utterly still in a way that was more frightening than rage, his voice dropping to something quiet and deadly. Lockdown protocol, now. Full sweep of every room, interrogate every staff member hired in the last 6 months. Find the traitor. Eleanor followed James through the house as Alexander strode ahead with lethal purpose, his entire demeanor transformed into something cold and predatory that sent shivers down her spine, even as she understood the necessity of it. They reached a secure viewing room overlooking what appeared to be a formal conference area, all dark wood and leather chairs arranged around a massive table, and James positioned her where she could see but not be seen through the one-way glass, while Alexander descended to meet his captains. She counted 8 men who filed in, each one radiating a particular brand of danger that marked them as enforcers and killers, and they took their seats with the wariness of predators, uncertain of the pack hierarchy in this moment of crisis. Alexander stood at the head of the table, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop as he surveyed them with eyes gone flat and merciless, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. One of you has betrayed this organization. One of you has fed intelligence to Richard Sinclair that has put my son and everyone in this household at risk. You will tell me who, or I will assume all of you are complicit. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken finally by a captain Eleanor recognized as Marcus Vega, a man whose scarred face and dead eyes had terrified her the one time they had crossed paths. With respect, Alexander, perhaps the liability is not one of us, but the civilian you have brought into our operations. The woman has no loyalty to this organization, no understanding of our world, and every reason to seek protection from someone like Sinclair. Alexander moved so quickly Eleanor barely tracked it, his hand slamming the table in front of Marcus with enough force to make everyone jolt. You question my judgment. The words were quiet, deadly, each syllable enunciated with perfect precision. You suggest that a woman who has twice risked her life to protect my son, who has had every opportunity to betray us and has instead chosen to stay despite the danger, is the security risk in this room. Marcus held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds before looking down, submission written in every line of his body. I meant no disrespect. I am simply exploring all possibilities. Alexander straightened, his eyes moving over each man with the focus of someone cataloging threats and weaknesses. Eleanor Ashworth is under my personal protection. She is not your concern. Your concern is finding the traitor among your own ranks before I am forced to consider that all of you are expendable. Another captain, younger than the rest, shifted uncomfortably and spoke with careful deference. We have done preliminary interrogations of all new hires in the past year. 3 individuals showed inconsistencies in their background checks. They are being held for more thorough questioning. Alexander nodded once, his expression unchanging. James will oversee the interrogations personally. Anyone who resists or attempts to leave the estate before this is resolved will be considered hostile. This meeting is over. Go secure your territories and wait for my orders. The captains filed out in tense silence, and Eleanor watched Alexander remain motionless at the head of the table until the room emptied, his control absolute even as she sensed the fury radiating beneath it. James appeared beside her and spoke quietly. What you just saw was mercy. There have been betrayals in the past where Alexander executed the entire chain of command to ensure the rot was cut out completely. He is showing restraint because he needs them functional right now, but if we do not find the traitor soon, that restraint will end. Eleanor looked into Alexander's eyes in that suffocating panic room, with Henry pressed between them and the sound of gunfire still echoing through her bones, and she knew there was only one answer she could give him, only one truth that mattered in this moment when death had come so close she could still taste the copper fear of it. Because Henry matters. Because no child should face violence alone. Because it is who I am, Alexander. I cannot be someone who runs when a child needs protecting. I will not apologize for that. Something shattered in his expression. All the iron control he maintained so ruthlessly cracking apart as he pulled her against him, with Henry caught safely between their bodies, and kissed her with a desperation that stole her breath and ignited every nerve ending in her body. She responded without thinking, her hand fisting in his shirt as months of tension and denial combusted into this single moment of raw need. And she understood with perfect clarity that this was the point of no return. That kissing Alexander Thornhill in a panic room while his enemies tried to kill them was possibly the most insane thing she had ever done, and she did not care because this felt more real than anything in her careful, controlled life had ever felt. Are you okay? Henry's small voice cut through the haze, and they broke apart with matching expressions of shock and something else Eleanor could not name. Alexander's hand still cupped against her jaw as he looked down at his son and then back at her with eyes gone dark and hungry. We are okay, Henry. We are all okay. His voice was rough, scraped raw, and Eleanor felt the promise beneath the words, even as James's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing that the breach was contained and the estate was secure. And Alexander kept them in the panic room for another 20 minutes until he received confirmation that every inch of the grounds had been swept and cleared, and when they finally emerged, Eleanor saw the carnage that had been carefully cleaned but not erased, scorch marks on walls and blood smears hastily wiped away. She kept Henry's face pressed against her shoulder so he would not see while Alexander spoke in low tones with James, his hand never leaving the small of her back as though he needed the physical contact to confirm she was real and whole. The prisoners were being held in the East Wing, and Alexander's expression as he looked toward that part of the house made Eleanor's blood run cold because she recognized that look now, the absolute conviction of a man about to do violence. Take Henry upstairs. I will come to you when this is finished. She wanted to argue but understood this was not her world to dictate terms in, so she nodded and guided Henry toward his suite, while Alexander disappeared with James and 3 armed men toward the interrogation. She stayed with Henry for 2 hours, reading stories and playing quiet games until the boy finally fell asleep, and only then did she venture into the hallway where she found James waiting with an expression of grim satisfaction. He broke. We have everything. Eleanor followed him to Alexander's office, where she found him standing at the window, with blood on his knuckles and exhaustion written in every line of his body. He turned when she entered, and she saw the weight of what he had done settling over him, even as he delivered the information in a voice gone flat and clinical. Richard Sinclair's endgame is not territory, it is revenge. 7 years ago, I killed his brother during a dispute over shipping routes. He has been planning this for years, waiting for me to have something he could take, and when Henry was born, he found his leverage. He wants me to watch my son die. Then he wants to kill you in front of me. Then he will kill me. The revelation landed like a physical blow, and Eleanor understood with terrible clarity that this would never end through negotiation or territorial compromise, that one of them had to die for the other to survive. What are you going to do? Alexander's eyes met hers, and she saw the decision already made, immovable as granite. I am going to kill him first. Eleanor heard them through the partly open door of Alexander's office, where he and James were finalizing the operational details. Their voices low and controlled as they discussed extraction routes and backup positions and acceptable casualty ratios. And the clinical precision of it made her stomach turn, because she understood they were planning for Alexander's death as calmly as they would plan a business acquisition. She pushed the door open without knocking, and both men looked up with matching expressions of surprise that would have been comical in any other circumstance. But there was nothing amusing about the cold determination in Alexander's eyes, or the way James immediately moved toward the exit to give them privacy. You cannot do this. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, her hands clenched at her sides to keep them from shaking. You cannot just walk into what is obviously a trap and expect me to sit here waiting to find out if you are coming back. Alexander stood slowly, his movements deliberate as he rounded the desk to face her, and she saw the exhaustion beneath his control, the weight of years of violence and loss pressing down on shoulders that had carried it alone for far too long. This is not your decision to make, Eleanor. This is my world, my responsibility, and my son's future that hangs in the balance. I will not risk Henry growing up with this threat hanging over him. I will not risk Sinclair coming for you again. This ends now, on my terms, and you need to accept that. She stepped closer, her fear transforming into fury, because how dare he be so calm about throwing his life away? How dare he kiss her like she mattered, and then plan to leave her with nothing but memories and a traumatized child? You think dying for us is noble, but it is just another form of abandonment. Alexander, Henry has already lost his mother. Do you want him to lose his father too? To grow up knowing you chose revenge over staying alive for him? And what about me? Her voice cracked on the question, and she hated the vulnerability but refused to look away from his eyes. What about what I want? Do I get any say in this, or am I just another asset you need to protect? Alexander's control fractured, and he closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity burning in his eyes. You think I want this. You think I want to leave you and Henry. You have become everything I did not know I needed, everything I thought I had lost the right to have. But that is precisely why I must eliminate this threat. If I die, James will protect you both. You will be provided for. You will be safe. But if I do nothing and Sinclair kills my son or hurts you, I will have failed the only 2 people who matter. Eleanor grabbed his wrists, holding his hands against her face as tears she refused to let fall burned behind her eyes. There has to be another way. Let James handle it. Let your entire organization handle it. You do not have to be the one to face him. Alexander's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and he leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips as he spoke with terrible finality. Yes, I do. This is personal now. Sinclair made it personal when he threatened my family. And you are my family, Eleanor, whether I have the right to claim you or not. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the desperate claiming in the panic room. This kiss was tender and aching and tasted like goodbye, and Eleanor kissed him back with everything she had been holding inside, every feeling she had tried to deny, every hope she had been afraid to acknowledge. When they finally broke apart, she was shaking, and his eyes were bright with emotion. He did not bother to hide anymore. Eleanor waited until the house fell into the tense quiet of early morning preparation, when Alexander's men were mobilizing, and James was coordinating final logistics in the operations room, and she slipped through the corridors she had memorized during her weeks of captivity, turned residency until she reached Alexander's private office, where she accessed his computer, using the password she had watched him type a dozen times without ever intending to use it. She found what she needed in his encrypted files: contact protocols and communication channels that connected to the darker parts of his world. And her hands shook as she composed the message to Richard Sinclair, using words that felt like swallowing glass, but might save Alexander's life. I am Eleanor Ashworth. You want leverage against Alexander Thornhill. I am offering myself as a hostage in exchange for a guaranteed ceasefire. Meet me, and we can negotiate terms that end this without further bloodshed. She sent it before courage could fail her, and then erased every trace of her access, moving through the estate toward the garage, where she knew a single vehicle was kept with keys in the ignition for emergency evacuation. The response came through on the burner phone she had taken from Alexander's desk within 10 minutes. A time and location, and a promise that Sinclair would come alone to discuss her proposal. Eleanor knew he was lying, but it did not matter because Alexander walking knowingly to his death mattered more than her safety, and if she could draw Sinclair's attention away even for a few hours, it might give Alexander the advantage he needed. She left a note for Henry tucked under his pillow where he would find it when he woke, simple words telling him she loved him and would see him soon. And she did not let herself think about the possibility that she was lying to a 5-year-old child who had already lost too much. James found her as she was starting the car, and his expression cycled through shock to understanding to fury so absolute she actually flinched. But he was too late, because she was already accelerating through the gate that his credentials had opened, and his shout of her name faded behind her as she drove toward the coordinates Sinclair had provided. The warehouse sat at the edge of the industrial port district, rusted metal and broken windows, and the smell of salt water and diesel fuel heavy in the cold morning air. And Eleanor's stomach twisted with fear that felt different from anything she had experienced before, because this was a choice she was making with full knowledge of the consequences. Richard Sinclair stood in the center of the empty space surrounded by armed men, at least 20 that Eleanor could count. And he was older than she expected, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that held the same predatory intelligence as Alexander's, but without any of the warmth she had learned to recognize. You must be the kindergarten teacher. His voice was cultured and amused as he gestured for her to approach, and Eleanor forced her legs to move despite every instinct screaming to run. You are either remarkably brave or remarkably stupid to offer yourself to me, and I confess I cannot decide which. Eleanor stopped 10 feet away and met his eyes with every ounce of courage she possessed. I am offering you what you want. Me. Alexander cares about me, and you know it. Take me and leave his son alone. Leave him alone. End this. Sinclair's laugh was genuine and chilling. Oh, my dear foolish girl, I never intended to honor any agreement. You are not the prize. You are the bait, and Alexander Thornhill is already on his way. The sound of car engines roaring to life outside the warehouse shattered the cold silence, and Richard Sinclair's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to dawning understanding as shadows moved behind the grimy windows, and the unmistakable sound of dozens of weapons being readied echoed through the cavernous space, and Eleanor felt his grip on her tighten as he yanked her back against his chest with the gun pressed cold and hard against her temple. Alexander stepped through the main entrance flanked by James and 3 other men Eleanor recognized from the estate, but his eyes never left her face, and the expression she saw there was utterly calm, the kind of terrifying composure that came from a man who had already made peace with whatever came next. "You made a miscalculation, Sinclair." Alexander's voice carried across the distance with absolute authority, and Eleanor saw Sinclair's men shift nervously as they realized the true scope of their situation. "You assumed I would come alone, or with minimal support, because you thought I valued speed over strategy. But I have spent 15 years building an organization that functions on loyalty and overwhelming force, and every single person who answers to me is currently surrounding this warehouse with instructions to kill everyone inside if I give the signal." Sinclair's laugh was strained, the gun barrel digging harder into Eleanor's skin as he tried to reassert control. "You would kill the woman you love to take me down, Thornhill? I find that difficult to believe given how spectacularly you have disrupted your entire operation to protect her." Alexander took 3 steps closer, and Eleanor could see the truth written in every line of his body, the absolute willingness to sacrifice anything and everything to end this threat permanently. "You are correct that I love her, which is precisely why I will not allow you to use her as a shield indefinitely. So here are your options laid out simply so even you can understand them. You release Eleanor now, and I will give you a clean death, a single bullet, and it ends quickly. Or you refuse and I give the signal and 50 armed men storm this building and you die slowly after watching everyone loyal to you get cut down. And I promise you that whatever happens to Eleanor happens to you tenfold before I let you bleed out. The choice is yours, but you have 30 seconds to decide." Eleanor felt the tremor run through Sinclair's body and saw his men exchanging glances that telegraphed their wavering loyalty, because they understood mathematics and survival, and she realized with crystalline clarity that Alexander had already won this confrontation through sheer force of will and strategic superiority. She had been working her shoulders incrementally during the standoff, creating microscopic amounts of space between her body and Sinclair's grip, using every technique she had ever learned in the self-defense class Catherine had dragged her to 3 years ago. And now in the heartbeat of hesitation, as Sinclair calculated his impossible options, Eleanor made her choice. She dropped her full weight suddenly, her knees buckling and body twisting, and Sinclair's grip broke just enough for her to fall away from the gun's trajectory. The sound of Alexander's shot was deafening in the enclosed space, and Eleanor hit the concrete hard as Sinclair crumpled behind her, and then everything erupted into controlled chaos. As Sinclair's men threw down their weapons in rapid succession, hands raised in surrender, as James and Alexander's team moved forward to secure them. Eleanor was shaking so hard her teeth chattered as Alexander reached her in 4 long strides, his hands running over her face, her shoulders, her arms, checking for injuries with a thoroughness that bordered on frantic, despite his controlled expression. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? Eleanor, answer me." His voice cracked on her name and she grabbed his jacket with both fists to steady herself. "I am fine. I am okay." "Alexander, I am sorry I should not have come here, but I could not let you walk into a trap without trying to." His fear transformed instantly into fury, his eyes blazing as he hauled her to her feet. "You could have died. You walked directly into the hands of a man who wanted to hurt me by destroying you. And you think an apology covers that level of reckless?" Eleanor felt her own anger rise to meet his, because how dare he be furious when he had been planning to sacrifice himself? So could you. You were ready to die today and leave Henry without a father and me without. She stopped because the words were too enormous and too true. But Alexander's hands tightened on her arms, and he pulled her against him with desperate force, his face buried in her hair as the adrenaline and terror finally crashed through his control. And Eleanor held him just as tightly, while around them James efficiently organized the cleanup and extraction. The drive back to the estate passed in silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of James coordinating cleanup protocols through his headset, and Eleanor sat pressed against Alexander's side in the back of the SUV, with his arm locked around her shoulders like he could not bear even an inch of separation after coming so close to losing her. When they arrived, Henry was waiting on the front steps with his nanny hovering anxiously behind him. And the moment the car doors opened, the little boy launched himself forward with a cry that tore through Eleanor's carefully maintained composure, his small body slamming into her with enough force to make her stagger before Alexander steadied them both. Henry's arms wrapped around her neck with desperate strength, and he was crying and talking simultaneously, words tumbling over each other about how James had told him she went somewhere dangerous, and he thought she was not coming back like his mommy did not come back. And Eleanor held him fiercely while her own tears finally spilled over because she had not let herself cry in the warehouse or during the aftermath. But this child's fear broke something open inside her chest. Alexander's hand settled on Henry's back, spanning the small shoulders, and then his other arm drew them both against him, so the three of them stood tangled together in the golden afternoon light, while the household staff discreetly withdrew and James directed his team to secure the perimeter. They stayed like that until Henry's sobs quieted to hiccups and exhaustion made his body heavy in Eleanor's arms, and Alexander lifted his son with practiced ease while keeping his other hand locked with Eleanor's, as they moved into the house and up the stairs to Henry's room, where the little boy refused to let go of Eleanor, even as his father tried to settle him into bed. She ended up lying beside him with Alexander stretched out on Henry's other side, the oversized bed barely accommodating all three of them, and Henry fell asleep within minutes, with one hand gripping Eleanor's shirt and the other clutching his father's fingers. Alexander's eyes met hers over their son, and Eleanor saw everything in that gaze, the possessiveness and fear and desperate relief, and the word that had echoed unfinished in the warehouse. And her heart hammered against her ribs because she knew what came next would determine the shape of the rest of her life. They extracted themselves carefully once Henry's breathing deepened into true sleep, and Alexander led Eleanor through the quiet house to the terrace that overlooked the gardens where moonlight painted everything silver and blue. He released her hand and moved to the stone balustrade, his back to her, shoulders tight with tension that read like preparation for battle, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the careful neutrality of a man delivering a prepared statement. Everything has changed. Richard Sinclair is dead, and the territorial challenges have been resolved through demonstration of superior force. My organization's position is secure, and there are no remaining threats to you or Henry. You are safe now, Eleanor. Truly safe. You can return to your apartment, to your teaching position, to your normal life, and I will ensure you have protection and financial security for as long as you need it. The words landed like stones in her stomach because she understood exactly what he was offering, the freedom to walk away from the violence and danger and complexity of his world, and she understood with equal clarity what he was not saying, that he believed himself too stained by blood and brutality to ask her to stay, that he was giving her the choice he thought she deserved, even though it would destroy him to watch her leave. Eleanor moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and she looked out at the gardens where she had first talked with Henry and begun to understand that safety and danger were not opposites but could exist intertwined in the same space. You think I do not know who you are? Her voice was steady, despite the enormity of what she was about to say. You think I have not seen the violence and the ruthlessness and the capacity for brutality that makes dangerous men follow your orders without question. But you are wrong if you think that is all I see, Alexander, because I also see the man who promises his terrified son he will come home and means it, who moved heaven and earth to protect my best friend because her safety mattered to me, who has given me choice and agency even when it would have been easier to simply command obedience. She turned to face him fully and reached up to cup his face in both her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I am not naive, and I am not blind, and I am choosing this, choosing you and Henry, and this strange, dangerous, beautiful life we have built from chaos and necessity. I want to stay. I want to be here when Henry wakes up tomorrow and every day after that. I want to fight with you and kiss you and build something neither of us thought we could have. Alexander's control shattered visibly. his hands coming up to cover hers as his eyes searched her face with an intensity that stole her breath. You deserve better than a man whose enemies will always look for weaknesses to exploit, whose past is soaked in blood, who cannot promise you safety or normalcy or any of the things. Eleanor stopped his words by pulling his face down to hers and kissing him with everything she had been holding back, all the fear and love and absolute certainty pouring into the contact, and Alexander responded with devastating completeness, his arms banding around her as he kissed her like she was oxygen and salvation, and everything he had convinced himself he could never have. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander pressed his forehead to hers and asked the only question that mattered. "Are you certain?" Eleanor's answer was immediate and unwavering. "Absolutely." The future unfolded in the days that followed, with Eleanor settling into the estate as more than a protected witness or temporary guardian, her presence transforming the household in ways both subtle and profound, as Henry's laughter became a constant soundtrack, and Alexander's careful distance dissolved into open affection. And though danger would always exist at the edges of their world, the three of them built something unshakable in the center, a family forged in fire and choice and love that proved stronger than fear.